Flowers are really amazing. And as you say, most organisms don't advertise themselves. If they do advertise themselves, it's to make themselves look like something else, right? So that they make themselves look like something that's deadly so that they can escape predation that way. So flowers are really unusual. They're also really unusual even among all plant groups, because other groups of plants that don't produce flowers, like our conifers and, other gymnosperms and our ferns and things, also don't have particularly flashy reproduction, and they don't generally involve the activities of other organisms. I mean, it is true that some cycads are beetle pollinated and benefit from certain insects, but most other plant groups do not have this sort of relationship with pollinators. And so, it's pretty spectacular when you think about the fact that, we've had land plants for, let's say 450 million years, and it's not until the last maybe 150 million years or so that there were flowers, and the number of flowering plant species is so much greater than all the rest of the plant species combined. So certainly over this, shorter time span of the last 120, 130, 150 maybe million years, the flower has definitely conferred advantages that have allowed for this crazy amount of diversification that
Mhm.
has allowed all these species to originate and to spread.
Yeah, so let's go from there then. So you just said that they're a very powerful tool that plants have. I was wondering, do we have that evolutionary story of like how flowers sort of came to be?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So when considering the fossil record of the flowering plants, Darwin referred to their origin and early diversification as an abominable mystery. And we still are not very clear on how this structure of the flower originated and became like so quickly entrenched in the whole lineage that became the flowering plants. I think the fossil evidence best tells us that the first flowers, they had these same basic parts, but they were very small. They were maybe potentially insect pollinated, but maybe wind pollinated. There are some fossils that suggest sort of maybe a transition from being a gymnosperm with the naked ovules to something that was, sort of a flower where there is the reproductive structure, but with like a little called a cupule around it. But we still really don't understand that. What we do know is that by 125 million years ago, there were the most common big group of flowering plants today are a group known as the eudicots, so EU dicots, the true dicots, in other words.
Hmm.
They were everywhere around the world. We have fossil pollen that corresponds to the eudicots almost everywhere in the world at 125 million years ago. So for some reason, they were able to spread, the plants were able to spread really rapidly. And we have the history of that in the fossil record through pollen. But at that point, even those fossils have very indistinct sorts of flowers. So they must have started out somehow like that. But then by, let's say 110 million years ago, we have a lot of groups of plants that we would recognize today as like, oh, that's a magnolia. That's something in the avocado family. So there were a lot of things that were actually sort of obvious very quickly after those other things originated. So we don't really know how they got started. There's some interesting work about some of the genes that control some of these organs. And through comparisons of those genes with non-flowering plants, we can see that those genes were active in the non-flowering plants, but they didn't produce those structures. So we know some of the genetics behind the structures of the flowers, but we don't know what the signals are that basically, led to the evolutionary switch.